Welcome to The Late Show. I'm standing in for Howard. It is Wednesday the 16th of April 2025. And tonight we're going to talk about something which is sort of dancing around the news, but no one's really focused on it, and that's why Revelation TV is here. And it is this Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, which is going through the second reading of the House of Lords. It's gone right through the House of Commons, the committee stage, the first reading, and it was basically sort of sneaked in just before Christmas, so there wasn't much debate. But it has profound implications on whether our children in the future are going to be educated by parents according to their beliefs, which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or whether the state is going to take control of our children. And to discuss that with me is our very own Mandy Johnson.
Thank you, Tim.
Great to see you,
Thank you,
Mandy.
Tim. Thank you. It's a blessing and a privilege to be here and to be part of the Revelation TV team. And we are the only channel who are willing to stand up and speak up and be counted.
Exactly. And I don't think there's anything more important than our children and who is indoctrinating them.
They are
they would say we're brainwashing, but I don't mind washing the brains rather than polluting the minds of children.
Indeed, and the modern terminology for brainwashing is mind control. So that is effectively what this bill is going to be doing. So
exactly. And so it's all about, and I suppose we see it in the news now increasingly with Donald Trump, it's whether you want to have state control or whether you want individual freedom. And it seems the whole world is dividing over that.
Yes, and we arrived from Lebanon in 1978, July 1978, and for many, many years I used to sing the praises of the freedom of expression we have here in the United Kingdom. And I used to say to people, this is the best country to live in the West, if you compare it with other Western nations. But very recently, we've been accelerating towards more and more state control.
Right.
And now that this state control is attempting to control young minds, we are heading for dangerous territory.
Exactly. So what we need is for you to email in your thoughts on whether you're very happy and relaxed about the state getting control of your children, or whether you think that there should be more than just a little slot before bedtime where you can just put a little bit of your Christian faith and direction into your children's lives. And just to help us focus on what does state control mean, we have a famous quote. And do you know what? People say, well, you've lost the argument if you have to mention Adolf Hitler, but I'm not so sure. I think it helps us just remember why it was enshrined in law that families should be protected from the state. And here's the quote. You can read it, Mandy.
Okay, thank you. When an opponent declares, I will not come over to your side, I calmly say, your child belongs to us already. You will pass on. Your descendants, however, now stand in the new camp. In a short time, they will know nothing else but this new community.
Yeah. And so we sometimes forget that they were the National Socialists. And, socialist ideology really, has a tenet, which I would say is religiously observed by the present Labour government. And that is that it's for the well-being of society that we're passing these laws. We want to have,
in theory,
a healthy democracy.
In theory, but in practice, they are surreptitiously trying to control absolutely every aspect of our lives, starting with children, as that quote from Adolf Hitler clearly says. And it is pertinent because this year's the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust, and we're still remembering what happened and how Hitler in the 1930s was able to control the young minds, the Hitler Youth. Yeah. So it's in this country, if we're trying to control the way children think, and we're not just talking about teaching people facts such as, you know, maths or literature, or we're talking about the way worldviews, and a very, very narrow worldview.
Exactly. Right now, we're going to go into the detail of this bill, by the way, but before we do, this morning I mentioned that in my office, I run a ministry called Christian Education Europe, and on my office wall, a whole wall is painted with the text. This is what I mentioned this morning. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Amen.
But we have another office wall that is the verse that we're going to put up on the screen from Proverbs. I'm not ready yet, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Okay.
We'll put it up on the screen shortly.
Yep.
And that is, train up a child in the way he should go. It's Proverbs 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it. And what that is, it's a kind of truism, because it's not just train up a child in the Christian way and he won't depart from it. It's train up the child in any way.
Correct.
And
yes.
they will not depart from it. The Jesuits knew that. They said,
Yes.
give me a child up to the age of 7, or from the age of 7, and I'll give you the man.
Yes.
Up to the age of 7, I'll show you the man. And, you know, we got the Hitler quote. We got many other quotes where they want to take control of the children. You mentioned something just before we went on air about how in, was it Laos?
Yes, in Laos they killed off the adult population, and all they did was they kept children because they wanted to erase the memory of the past, because children rely on their parents telling them stories about the past, what it used to be like. So they annihilated the adult population, and they brought
erased the whole culture.
Yes, it caused the demise of the countries. The demise of the country. So to this day, it's suffering.
Yeah. So, as promised, we'll put it up on the screen. It is this wonderful quote, which you're going to read again,
Yes.
Mandy.
So this is Proverbs 22, verse 6. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. So yes, Tim, you're absolutely right. So train up a child. So if you're training them up in the way of the Lord, then when he grows up, he will not depart from the way of the Lord. Likewise, if you train up a child in the way of lawlessness, for example, then and in fact, with gang members and so on, the children are born into gang families, like the mafia, for example, and they carry on with their parental profession, for want of a better word. So, yeah.
It's absolutely terrible. Okay, so let us have a look at, you're thinking, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Now, when the government say children's well-being, I think Christians should have alarm bells ringing. I mean, there are many who do have the best of intentions, but we know that where the destination is of those who are building a road with good intentions.
Yes, yeah. Yes, indeed.
Another quote.
Yes, it's fiery, shall we say.
It's quite fiery. But anyway, yeah, I think as President Reagan said, the scariest words that you could hear is, hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, or something. And this is what the government are trying to help, but actually there's an agenda that goes back a number of years, and I don't know whether we can show it on the screen. The background to the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. You probably can't see it in detail, but in 2010, the Conservative government instituted a review with a chap, I think his name was Graham Badman, and, you know, appropriate name, a surname, but he was reviewing compulsory registration and monitoring of home educated children. That should put a chill through people's spines, because it's basically government inspection of children in their homes, which is what the Stasi did, by the way.
Yes.
My wife, Simone, grew up under the East German DDR, German Democratic Republic, which was nothing of the sort, and because her parents, her father was not in favour of the regime, they had to keep a guest book at home of everyone who visited, and the school teacher had a right to go into the home and see who is visiting the home and what is being taught the children at home. And it was real oppressive control. And that's what they're proposing.
Yes, and we have an East German friend who now lives in West Berlin, but she said that unless, in a classroom of 30, unless your parents belonged to the Stasi, you weren't allowed to do the Abitur, the German A-levels.
That's exactly their
And
experience.
so children could not further their education. And I said, well, so she was showing me this beautiful church, and I said, well, what did they tell you that this church was? They said, oh no, this is all about mythology.
Right.
So,
oh no, you were marked out if you decided to identify and go to church. Funnily enough, though, during the communist times, churches were well attended as a resistance, as a rebellion to this regime. And since the Berlin Wall has come down, churches are virtually empty. So it's a tragic outcome of this opening up of Germany, where a large number of the established churches are really just for weddings and funerals and christenings.
it's very sad. I've noticed that wherever you have suffering, there you have revival.
Yeah.
So when there is hardship, I could even say, in my own personal case, we grew up in a strong Christian family, and when there was a civil war in Lebanon, and we're living through the civil war, and no electricity and no water, and we were all very prayerful,
strong.
very strong, implacable. But when we came to the UK, and everything was safe and well, for those few years in my 20s, yes, I still believed in God, but I would call those my wilderness years, because everything was well in my world, and there was no need for God. And so I find that, yes, where there is suffering, there is revival. Look at China, for example.
Exactly.
In China, the underground church is thriving, not the Three Self Church, where they don't allow the book of Revelation at the end. All sermons have to be approved in advance. They don't allow anybody under the age of 18 to attend church, because the Bible also talks about the coming king. So they're thinking about an actual, well, Jesus is an actual king, but a political king.
It has become much more oppressive, no doubt about it. And again, because I'm connected with Christian curriculum, we have a number of examples where folks have been imprisoned for possessing what they call foreign religious literature. And that is pretty all-encompassing. And some of our teachers have gone to prison for 8 years. So that's happening now. And people are saying, oh, why don't we do business with China because we hate Trump? What they're saying is, look, we hate someone who gives a wonderful gospel message for Easter. This is Donald Trump, and we prefer the godless, God-hating Chinese Communist Party, and that's the division in the world today.
It's blatant.
Yeah.
The Chinese government had a 50-year plan, a very long-term plan. Right. Unlike us in the West, we tend to think only in 4-year terms. Even the United States, their presidential mandate is just 4 years. Ours is about 4 or 5 years, and so on. So in the West, presidential or prime ministerial terms are about 4 or 5 years. That's not long enough to accomplish anything. So we're very, very myopic in our view.
But Mandy, let's go back to this bill, because this is almost like a 15-year plan. So in 2017, Lord Soley, who supports secular education, he proposed compulsory registration and monitoring by local authorities. He suggested annual assessments, that's of homes being inspected. That's more than Ofsted do on schools. It did not pass, but you see it's being pushed by the civil service. And then in 2018, the government did a consultation. And whenever you hear consultation, you know who they're going to consult, the usual suspects. And it's a bit like the 2013, Same-Sex Marriage Act. They did a consultation, but all those who opposed it were put into one block as one vote. And that's the way government worked. But the DfE launched the consultation on a register and support for home-educated families. By the way, they designate home-educated families, even those elective home educators who have chosen to do it, who are within the law as educating otherwise. They're allowed to do it, but they put them all as not in school, in the bracket as, not in school, along with extremist, madrasas, let's say, and and others who are just not educating their children, who are unschooling, and they say it's all not in school. But then, just carrying on, just get through this. 2022, there was a private members' bill. So this was now the Conservative governments who introduced it, then it was scrapped, and then it's been chuntering on because it's a flawed concept. But in come the Labour governments, and pretty well without any amendment, Bridget Phillipson has pressed and pushed this bill to the Commons. It's been voted on, a bit like the assisted dying. Not a lot of scrutiny, completely flawed bill, which now they're delaying until 2029. And they've put it in just before Christmas. Bridget Phillipson and Jackie Smith, who's a former Home Secretary.
Terrible, terrible. And Catherine Birbalsingh, the head of Michaela Academy, which has even beaten Eton College in the last 2 years with its results. And this is a school, secondary school, with 50% ethnic minority children, and the other 50% are children of Western immigrants. No British, not very many British children there, but very, very successful.
And it's an inner city school.
Inner city school.
Kids from deprived backgrounds.
And she has written an open letter to, she's met Bridget Phillipson, but Bridget Phillipson could not answer any of Catherine Birbalsingh's questions. She is known as the UK's strictest headmistress.
That's right.
But highly successful.
Very effective.
Yes,
but Bridget Phillipson is a radical, and she's in charge of our kids. That's the point. Just go to another slide. So I'll try and give you background, and then we'll read your emails coming in. But this is the next one, Mandy, which is the consultation that the government launched. This was the response. It's really interesting. So who supports the register? Local authorities, 96%. Of course they do. It's power to go into any home and start bossing the parents around and looking what's on their library shelves. Next one, schools and teachers hate homeschooling. Third sector organisations, that's charities, is pretty mixed. So it's more neutral, the opinion, 57%. Others, 45%. But of those who are parents and young people, just look at the numbers alone. Okay, it's 18%, only 18% of 3,500 who are consulted. Well, that dwarfs all the others who are consulted, and yet they're going ahead with it anyway. It's very revealing. It's very revealing. In other words, those consultations are just a rubber stamping exercise to say we've done it. We've consulted, irrespective of what the response is.
They're not listening to any opposing voices, which is
shocking.
A very bad way of doing things. If you were in business, and you were trying to decide what option of service or product you're going for, you would carry out a proper study to see which is the best way to do something.
You're out of business if you ignore the response of the customers. Or for instance, if you do, let's say dog food testing, and you put it in front of the dogs, and the dog does not like the dog food, but you still foist it on the dog anyway. That's not very good market research.
No, well,
and you're going to go out of business
because they're dictating, and
Correct.
they are dictating their own and wanting to control the outcome.
Now, just to say, as we said earlier, it's with the best of intentions. But what we're highlighting is some of the more sinister aspects of this children's well-being bill. The best of intentions is to protect against abuse of children, of course. But provisions are already there with social services to enter a home if there's any sign that a child is not being looked after.
It's a very underhand way of trying to achieve their purpose,
which is control.
And in fact,
it's a blunt instrument.
Normally, when children, in the case of children who are mistreated, when a teacher has a classroom full of children, say, somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 children in a classroom, she gets to know those children very well, and especially in the primary sector and in the secondary sector. I've taught myself in the secondary sector and at university too. And you get to know the children, and you get to know their characters, and you get to see if there's if they're happy or unhappy.
And now they have classes double that size.
Yes. So
it's much more difficult.
It is, but this is what I'm trying to say is that I think you would notice, if you're an observant person, that if a child is unwell. So in a way, this bill is showing itself up for what it truly is. It's not just about the well-being of the child.
Correct, because there's already levers and mechanisms for protecting children. If we look into, by the way, just so that you know, I mentioned earlier the stages that the bill has gone through, and now you can see it. So if you see on the left, all the boxes that are ticked, a first reading, second reading, committee stage, report stage, and final reading, if I'm correct. Third reading, sorry. That's all happened in the House of Commons, and they're now ticking the boxes in the House of Lords. First reading, and then now on the second reading. In other words, this is going to happen. There's no doubt about it. This is going to be passed, this bill.
They're rushing it through.
And they've got a majority. They can push it through. What we're saying is, highlighting is beware, because just like these other acts, so we had the Supreme Court today on the Gender Recognition Act and the Equality Act, 2024 and 2004 and 2010, is unravelling.
It is, and teachers have a lot of influence over their children. I say their children, the children in their classrooms, and they are the ones who are teaching children certain things that without parental consent, that go against religious beliefs. When I say religious beliefs, not just Christian beliefs, but also Muslim beliefs.
Jewish and Muslim.
Jewish beliefs.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
It's a clash of values, and the secular values are very different to the traditional family values.
They value less.
They are. They're void. I want to read a quote, or you could read it, Mandy, which is from Simon Calvert. Now, he was the barrister who won the campaign No to the Named Persons Act in Scotland. Now, in Scotland, they were very radical on a number of these issues we've discussed, but they wanted to create a Named Persons Act so that every child born would be required to have a state guardian. And Simon Calvert won the case against the government of Scotland in 2016, and this is what he said.
He said, the first thing that a totalitarian regime tries to do is to get at the children, to distance them from the subversive, varied influences of their families and indoctrinate them in their ruler's view of the world. Within limits, families must be left to bring up their children in their own way.
Yeah, exactly. And he also quoted Simon Calvert from the US Supreme Court judgment, which said that the child is not the mere creature of the state. And parents are not educating children on behalf, the state shouldn't be educating children on behalf of, the state should be educating children on behalf of parents, not the other way around, parents educating on behalf of the state. But unfortunately, we can show from this bill that the government's intention is exactly that the state should have supervision over everything that's taught the child.
And even in even children who are homeschooled, the state is controlling the material that parents are choosing.
That's what they want to do. Yeah,
that's what they want to do.
Now, I haven't even looked at your emails coming in, but they are coming in, so keep writing them in, please. I want to just highlight one other aspect, and it looks so innocuous, Mandy. It's a classic. And a friend of mine, Nigel Seal, has been looking into what is within this bill that we've just told you is now in the second reading of the House of Lords. And within it, there's a little reference to a memo, a government memo on the European Court of Human Rights ruling. And we're going to look at that memo because that memo is really long. So you have a little reference to a memo to say that we should be following this judgment on human rights, and it is Slate's number 8, and it's clause 161 of the memo. And the memo has a myriad of elements to it.
And you said it's a very long memo with...
It's a very long memo, but the root of it is this, that there was a court case in Germany against a homeschooling family, or a homeschooling family against the government, on their right to educate their children according to the European Convention of Human Rights. And the court in Germany concluded, as you can read here, that the conventions, I'll read it if you want. The court in this case rejected claims that Articles 8 and 9 of the Convention of Human Rights, and whatever it is, A2, P1, were breached when home education was banned, requiring education in a private state schooling. In other words, they sided with the state, and we're going to look at 4 elements to that clause 161. And if you read them out, we may pause on each one.
So the first one is, the state has a role in ensuring children are educated and ensuring pluralism in education, which is key to a democratic society.
Okay, now that is just literally taken out of German law, but it's in an English, it's in a bill that we're passing in the English Parliament, which is effectively saying, let's follow the German system. Let's read the second one in this clause.
The second one says, the child's right to an education takes priority over respect for parental religious and philosophical convictions if the two are incompatible.
Okay, isn't that brilliant? Isn't that so?
That's scandalous.
It's George Orwell, because it's basically saying, who decides they're incompatible?
Exactly.
What is in the interests of the child? They are saying this is in the interests of the child, and if what the state says is in the interests of the child is not compatible with what the parents say,
that's shocking.
Who wins? Yeah. So let's read the next one.
That's shocking. So the third one says, the state can insist on compulsory education in school, and that the aims of ensuring acquisition of knowledge and of integrating minorities into society are legitimate justification for insisting on this and are within a country's own margin of appreciation.
Again, it is really spooky, because it's basically saying, if we put it up on the screen again, that the state can insist on compulsory education. Well, that's it. In other words, if they deem that the homeschooling education is not to their liking or taste, they can force them, it's within their margin of appreciation, to force them to attend basically state indoctrination.
Force feed them.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's shocking.
So
and the fourth one of this sort of innocuous memo.
The fourth one says, the ability of parents to educate their children after school and at weekends in conformity with their religious convictions was sufficient to establish that their rights were not restricted in a disproportionate manner.
This is the biggest one of all for me, because for Christian parents who think that Sunday school is enough to bring up a child in the way he should go, when they've got 5 days a week being indoctrinated other than in the Christian faith. And so what they're saying is, the judges are saying, by the way, I like the 5 here, 5 days. 5 days versus half an hour at church, or let's say a bedtime reading. But how many Christian parents or any parents have time after a long day's work to actually even sit down with their kids? So it doesn't happen. But they're saying, oh, that's sufficient time.
It's not sufficient time. Yeah. You could take the analogy, for example, of, so this is, as I say, you're feeding the children. So you're feeding them with knowledge. But imagine, take actual food. If you only ate on a Sunday, you would starve, right? Yeah. So likewise, if you didn't have a spiritual nourishment, if you only had it once a week, you would be starved of your spiritual nourishment, or you would be starved of your knowledge, or of how And the other thing is, when God created us, he gave us free will. He knew what would happen, and he knew which path we would choose. But nevertheless, he gave us free will. So if God, the Almighty, the Creator, allowed us to have free will and make our own choices, and Jesus, when he came, 2,000 years ago, did not impose himself on people. So I just think it's arrogance in the extreme to try and impose one's own views and opinions on the whole nation. Yeah. It is the whole nation, because they are the future. The children of today are the next generation. They're the adults who will be voting, who will be working, who will be making decisions. So this is really, really important. And even if anybody out there doesn't have any children of their own, I'm sure they know children, and they themselves were children once. So it's a very important topic.
Just for some encouragement, a friend from America sent me an article from Fox News talking about young adults are flocking to church, leading to a 50% growth overall in attendance from 6 years ago. That's Gen Z leads rise in church attendance in the UK. So even though the state is trying to enforce this, don't give up. Don't give up, because God has another plan. I'm going to read some emails, shall I?
The Sunday Telegraph, last Sunday's Telegraph also had an article about young people, say late teens, early 20s, are also flocking to churches. They're looking for a purpose in life, a meaning to their lives. Yeah.
Mr. M says, if a government takes over control of our children, then they will be given over to Satan. Funny you should have written that, Mr. M, whatever M stands for, because what was ringing through my ears is one of my favourite songs, anthems, the Jerusalem anthem, that says, and did those feet in ancient time. And it's a bit dodgy theologically, but it says, and was Jerusalem builded here in Britain among those dark satanic mills? And for many years, I thought, we understand how that applies to the Industrial Revolution and the exploitation of children. But I liken it to my schooling in state education. They were dark satanic mills. And I would say our prayer is that Jerusalem would be brought back into our schools.
Yes, amen.
And God's word would be brought back, and the Lord's Prayer would be brought back, and a Christian assembly, which is still in the law, by the way, that there should be a predominantly Christian gathering every day in school. Well, that's completely breached.
It is. I think they do it like three times a week, some schools. I don't think they have a whole school. I think they do part of a school, don't they? Year groups and so on. And of course, as some of us might know, or some of you may have heard, that there is a movement amongst some of the new MPs who were elected at the last election to abolish daily prayer in Parliament. So if you have a Prime Minister...
Many of them didn't actually take the oath.
Yes, they didn't.
Some took a Muslim oath. Unbelievably.
They wouldn't put their hand on the Bible, but when you have a Prime Minister who is setting the standard with a small s, if you want to call it that,
says he's an atheist,
who openly declares himself an atheist, and I just think, if you're an atheist, then you think you are the pinnacle of intelligence. You think there is nothing greater than you. I think to me that shows arrogance. And of course, Romans chapter 1 says, doesn't it, that of course
they claim to be wise.
They claim to be wise.
And they exchange the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like.
And so
mortal man.
We do know in our hearts of hearts that God exists. And we just choose to reject him.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the worst thing, isn't it? Although they knew God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do them, but encourage others.
Encourage others,
to
yes,
practice it.
yes.
That is the shocking thing. John and Tara say, what you sow on earth is what you reap in heaven. Let's go spiritual. Because Ofsted inspectors are the ones who are being encouraged now to inspect children's homes, the homes of
That's
children.
so intrusive.
Isn't
Can
it
you imagine?
amazing? Because that's what they're encouraging.
That's going to open up a can of worms,
It's
really.
unworkable. It's unworkable.
Yes, how would you have...
But so it's unworkable for everyone to be inspected. So guess who they're going to target when they inspect?
The Christians,
They will.
Yes.
And they are so sort of biblically and religiously illiterate, they will not understand Christian education. Simple as that. In fact, they'll say it's harmful.
Probably. But so much for the equity, diversity and inclusion, the EDI.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So really, if we lived in a fair society, then irrespective of your beliefs, be they religious or not, then you would treat people equally. Yeah. So equally, whether they come from a British background or an immigrant background, so that's the diversity and inclusion. Exactly. You would be inclusive, say, oh yes, okay, why not if you want to be educated at home? We will allow that. So in a way, it's the EDI is it's oxymoronic, really.
Absolutely. Also, it's our Christian society, Christianity, Judeo-Christian worldview embedded in our society that has always encouraged equity, always encouraged inclusion.
Indeed.
And, for God so loved the world.
That he gave the world, not half the world. Or,
yeah.
Yes, exactly.
His only son, that whoever, doesn't matter who you are, whoever believes in him, but they've decided to narrow it down and to define their view, let's say, of equality. Because, by the way, we're not just shooting from the hip here. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have pretty well said, look, the government has to look at, they've got to rewrite the law, the equality law, because, as George Orwell said, all are equal, but some are more equal than others. And we know that the 9 protected characteristics are a hierarchy. And it is relevant to what we're talking about because the Ofsted inspectors are referencing, British values and referencing this list, but very much focusing on 1 or 2 elements of that list.
Absolutely. And there are other things that amongst those protected characteristics, there are some groups that are chosen, shall we say, and for
positive discrimination quotas. Exactly.
And certainly the government is too afraid to not protect certain groups in our society.
Exactly.
But because we are peaceable, loving people, and
retiring,
we're not likely to cause mayhem if we
that's right. If our nose is out of joint, so we'll be ignored.
Exactly. So we're not likely to protest loudly. We do protest. For example, after the October 7th massacre, there were protests in favour of Israel and in favour of the hostages. Nobody talks about the hostages. But you have, to this day, you have people protesting in favour of Gaza. So we, as Christians, we tend to do things quietly, not very loudly, behind the scenes. We don't make a fuss, and we get trodden on.
My grandchildren, now this is an anonymous text, my grandchildren were home educated for the last 10 years of their schooling. One finished up at university, the other college for about the last 5 years to get their A-levels. They are Christians.
Actually,
yeah, it's a myth that kids underperform.
They outperform. They outperform because you're working on a 2-to-1 or 3-to-1 ratio instead of a 30-to-1 ratio, and you're giving them individual attention, And children love it, attention from their parents. So they tend to excel, actually.
Exactly. This is from Jay. I haven't got your first name, but we don't generally give the surnames, but it's in your email address. You know who I'm talking about, Jay. I brought my children up in a Christian household. My daughter, sorry, up in a Christian household. She is now 42. She is bringing up my granddaughter in a Christian household. She is 12 years old. That will be a challenge with the watering down of values from school, government and outside influences. My granddaughter is a wonderful girl. Only way forward is to stay on course with the way, the truth and the life.
Oh, amen to that, Jay.
Yeah.
Amen to that, Jay.
Absolutely. And our friend Eddie has a comment to you, Mandy. Mandy claims God has given men free will. According to Calvinists, God has not given free will to men when it comes to choosing to follow Jesus. Perhaps Mandy needs to study Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. Go on, give Eddie a good answer on that one.
Okay, Eddie, I'm so pleased that you've been reading Calvin and you've been watching Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. That's wonderful. Eddie, we pray that you just say a prayer, God, if you truly exist, show yourself to me, reveal yourself to me, and he will answer you. I promise you that.
That's very good, because there's that Bible verse that says, if you seek me with all your heart, you will surely find me.
Indeed. And I think, you know, that's the good thing about us Christians. We can agree to disagree on the interpretation of certain things. Yeah. But what I meant by free will is that God did not create us as robots. We're not all automatons. So we believe he created Adam and Eve. So when he created Adam and Eve, he said to them, you may eat from every tree in this garden except for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So he gave them choice. Instead of giving them a computer for a brain, he gave them a natural brain. Yeah. So we do have free will. Yeah.
By the way, today I saw it in the Times. I always look at the birthdays in the Times, and today is Dame Joan Bakewell's birthday.
Oh wow!
She's famous. Something? She's 92.
Well, very good.
So
age.
Happy birthday, Joan!
Yeah.
I remember her interview with Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. It's an absolute classic. You can find it online, Eddie, and anyone else who wants to read it, to watch it. It's on YouTube. But she was like the darling of the kind of permissive society in the 60s and 70s. Yes. And this interview was in 1970. And she was questioning Martin Lloyd-Jones's evangelical beliefs at a time when his church was packed. So it would be 1,000, 2,000 would attend his Bible studies. And she asks him his first question, and he talks about the problem of man's rebellion. He says rebellion. But it's interesting with Dame Joan Bakewell in that she used to spar with Mary Whitehouse, who very much stood up for Christian values, and it was the National Viewers and Listeners Association bemoaning some of the terrible trends on television. And Joan Bakewell used to poo-poo Mary Whitehouse.
She was mocked by so many people.
Then in later life, if you look up what Joan Bakewell said of Mary Whitehouse, she was right.
Wow.
That what's on television influences
Amazing.
Society. So that's special, really.
Was that splashed across the headlines?
Nah,
Joan
a
Bakewell
little.
retracted.
A little.
Recanted.
Brian, I can't go into your email just purely. Shall I go into it? Come on, I don't always read your emails because there's too much in it for us to get our heads around because we're just mere mortals, Brian. But anyway, talking of Badman, he says, name well observed for Badman's so-called Wellbeing law of 2009. That's quite cleverly worded. As these two numbers, 2 and 9 in 2009, also appear in Daniel's 1290 days abomination to stand as law, i.e. 10, in the holy place of God. Have you ever read Brian's emails?
Once or,
They can keep you going if you're
yes,
running out.
yes.
If you're running out of time, and which we've got time. And then he says, by the ungodly state to stand as replacement of the children's heavenly Father through replacing their earthly paternal father. That is very interesting. I think you're saying that somehow the law is represented by the number 10. But you're a cleverer guy than me to get that out of 1290 days of abomination. But it is amazing. This guy's name was Bad Man.
My name and...
Yeah. Well, you don't want to be too hard. I mean, my name, Vince, means unconquerable.
You are, I'm sure you are.
Incapable of being
unconquerable. No.
But no, you don't want to go too hard on names. But I've named my son, one of his middle names is Horatius.
Excellent.
Not only because of
does he
Horatius
mind?
Bonar, Eddie. Horatius Bonar was one of Martin Lloyd-Jones' favourite hymn writers. And
okay.
I heard the voice of Jesus say, "Come unto me and rest."
Amazing.
Lay down thy head, thou weary one. But also, he was a famous, in the legends of ancient Rome, he was a famous hero who stood against overwhelming obstacles and won a battle against the Etruscan army.
Wonderful.
And so
wonderful. So that's a great name to carry.
It's a great name. Shall we just sort of recap a little?
Yes, please.
So this bill, not that we got many notes on it, but but this bill is happening now. It basically is a kind of stark choice which we're not being given, which God gave us. You're quite right. God gave us free will to choose, but we're not given a choice in this one. The government are going to push this bill through, which will mean that children will have an identifier. So the Named Persons Act that was defeated in Scotland is going to come in to everywhere.
Yes.
And they're also extending it to Wales with the stroke of a pen. So it's not just for England, it's England and Wales. And so children were going to have an identifier. The governments, or let's say local government, will have the right to enter any home. They'll have the right to make a decision under this act, which judges will have to interpret, but to say, right, that child is not getting an adequate education.
We'll have to contest.
Yes.
We'll have to pray our socks off.
Yes.
Pray your socks off, viewers.
Yes.
Pray your socks off. There is power in prayer.
And then another element of the bill, if I can just get it in my head, is that they will, this whole idea of the state deciding what's happening. This idea of praying is really important because we were talking earlier about the VAT. So the government have taken away charity status effectively from private schools. Bridget Phillipson hasn't consulted with any of these independent schools.
No.
But what is happening in terms of challenging that bill?
The children who have special educational needs, who get grants to go to private schools, now cannot go to private schools. They've lost that extra funding, and the state sector cannot accommodate them at all. The state sector is already burdened with special educational needs, and the government, today I read that the government has initially approved a report it commissioned regarding special educational needs, but now it's saying that it's going to cap the funding for special educational needs in the state sector. So these children are just going to slip through the net, sadly. So really, they might be, yes, they might be shooting themselves in the foot by bringing this VAT on schools. So it's had so many repercussions.
And it's not. See, they've created it as an ideological thing, you see, that, we want to take money from these privileged kids and give the money to state schools. But that pot of money isn't there.
No, and they've been aiming at the wealthy. And yes, the wealthy might send their children into private schools, and the very wealthy schools don't need to worry. But so many private schools have already shut down. So many parents who were scrimping and saving to send their children to have a better education. You might have both parents working very hard to send because they would like their children to have smaller classes, better discipline, and all these things. All that is just, being ripped away from under them. And so it's nothing to do with the wealthy. It goes back to this control, because control is on so many levels. It's schools, it's your health, it's your the way you think. Also, yes, all sorts of matters in every area of life. So, if we could, we have to say, Maranatha.
Yeah, exactly.
Lord, please do not tarry.
So, and then I was going to say, if you folks like a dear friend who used to watch Rev TV, she's gone to be with the Lord now, Gillian Orpin. She was always writing to her local MP. She was always writing to the Times, and sometimes they published her letters. Now, the point is, you should write, and you should challenge the government or your local MP on, have they read the memo on the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights?
Votes matter to them.
Yes. Have they read Clause 161?
If we don't vote for them, and we make it clear how important this matter is to us, and it's a matter of whether we would vote for them or for another party next time we have elections.
It could be quite close. And by the way, there's a local election coming up. It's very close.
Yes, not across the whole country. That's another matter. That's another matter of control.
Correct. They have actually withdrawn the democratic rights to vote.
The area in which we live, there will be no local election. No local election. It is. So we can't even express our opinion.
And they've done it deliberately in some of the areas where they're vulnerable, the Labour Party.
Of course they have.
And they're very, very clever. And then, so the other point about this Clause 161 is ask your MP, have they read it? And why has there been no debate about it? That we are subsuming the UK, British Constitution under German law. That's basically what we're saying.
Because we're aligning ourselves with the EU again.
That's the danger.
We are aligning ourselves with the EU, and today the EU was saying that in a trade war with the United States, it was going to align itself with China, and so we're moving towards the King of the North instead of the King of the South. So it's not good for us as a nation.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need to vote, we need to speak up, we need to stand up, we need to write to our MPs, as you said, and we need to make sure that we are educating our children.
Exactly.
Always.
It's really important. And I would say also for grandparents, because often you think, phew, by the way, I don't have grandchildren yet, so who am I to say?
I do.
But no, the responsibility carries on, doesn't it?
Of course it does.
And the best I heard was from Joe Boot. You mentioned him. We did a debate discussion on secular education. And I remember him once talking about Hezekiah and likening it to grandparents, because Hezekiah, at the end of his life, was given an extra 15 years.
He was.
And then he did the most stupid thing, allowing the state, as it were, the king of Babylon, to see all his treasures. And it could be likened to us, allowing state inspectors to come in and inspect the treasury of our home, the spiritual treasure, our children. And Isaiah, in Isaiah 37, he says to Hezekiah, Did you show them everything? Oh, yes, I showed them everything. He was so proud. He showed these envoys, these emissaries from the king of Babylon, everything. And Isaiah said, you idiot.
Absolutely.
He said, the day will come when they will take your children from you. They'll take all your treasures and they will take your children. That was fulfilled. But what did Hezekiah say at the end? In his heart, what he said to Isaiah was, oh, you've spoken well, Isaiah, you've spoken well. But in his heart, he said, at least there will be peace in my lifetime. Effectively, the same as we can say to grandparents today, you've had a good run, generally speaking, and especially if you've got through, as we've read, educating your children in the way of the Lord. And I note that you mentioned, Jay, that your granddaughter as well is being brought up in a Christian household. Wonderful. But there are some who say, I've done the job, I'll leave it to my kids to educate the grandchildren. Not good enough.
Grandparents also have, excuse me, have a responsibility. Not all grandparents live in close proximity to the grandchildren, but when they do, we live in a world of modern technology, and so it's important that we remain in contact with our family members, and that we remind our children and grandchildren the Christian values, because they won't forget that, and that we pray for them. We pray for them. It says in Psalm 139, God tells us, I knitted you in your mother's womb. So when we know that if we have a daughter or a daughter-in-law who is pregnant, start praying for that baby straight away in the womb. I did when my daughter-in-law was carrying her our first grandchild and our second grandchild immediately.
Just before my dad went to glory, I met him on the Sunday. He went home to the Lord on the Thursday. But I was there with my son, who was a toddler, and my daughter was in the womb. And he focused on praying for her, the baby in the womb.
Beautiful.
And then he had gone a few days later. Yes, so we must remember the Bible verse.
Yes.
Train up your child in the way they should go, and they will not depart from it. That is such an important verse, isn't it?
It is. It is. Well, I hope...
We're in our last minute, Mandy,
well,
so final encouragements.
Final encouragement. Final encouragement. Well, Psalm 34 talks about God will erase the memory of the unrighteous in verse 16. So our hope is in Jesus Christ, and so we must continue to be focused on Him, and to pray against unrighteousness. The Lord hates evil. So yes, God bless.
Bless you, Mandy, and thank you for coming in at short notice. But thank you also, everyone who's been watching this. There's that verse in Romans 1, so they may be without excuse, and that's why we're here, just to warn you all, so you may be without excuse. God bless you. Thank you so much, Mandy.